Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Program Director. Give me an opportunity just to load the slideshow. There we go. Before I get started, just a quick test. Can everyone see the slideshow? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can, Mr. Flick.
All right, magic. Just observe some protocol before we get moving. I understand timing is quite tight, but protocol is important. I just want to thank the BBCBE. I just want to appreciate the senior members of the BBCE putting this on for us. I want to appreciate the time and effort from the panelists, as well as all the members for joining us today. A special mention of thanks to the National Chief Inspector, Mr. Tibos Nzana, which is fantastic for him to get involved at this level with us and to run through that. It's quite a substantial amount of information. This is printed out, by the way. So he did a fantastic job to run through that in an hour with us, just to give us some of the key insights there. So thank you very much for that. What you'll notice on the slide in front of you there, the bottom left corner, I've given thanks to Sash. The first presentation I went through was with Sash, which was actually with the Chief Inspector as well. So it's only right to give thanks. Most of what you're going to see in the next few slides is my interpretation of what the Act is saying, and my opinion of what the primary impacts are going to be in terms of us as a contractor. I represent a construction company as a principal contractor most of the time. So this is just a few slides just to break down that amendment and where I feel that the impacts are going to be most felt. First, but obviously before we get moving, it's always important to just take a quick moment, appreciate where we are in the country in terms of COVID. It's obviously in a very dire situation at the moment. As you can see there, just under 65,000 deaths within the country, which is a tremendously sad state that we're in. The figures that you see there for the 11th of July, the figures on the 12th of July have come down significantly. So hopefully that's a good sign. It's 11,182. So we hope that that is us making the turn on the wave. All we can do is hope, I suppose. And for those of us who are people of faith, I ask that you just keep these families, businesses, anyone that's impacted by this virus, just keep them in your prayers. And hopefully we're starting to see some good recovery now. On the bottom right corner, you see the vaccinations administered. So that's great, just over 4.2 million vaccines. And the 35-year-olds are going to be open for registration quite soon, I believe on Thursday. So there is some good news coming out of that as well on the vaccination side. Right, let's get into it. Key additions to the Act that I've pulled out there. I'm not going to run through them one by one. I believe Mr. Nzana did a great job already. These are just some key ones that I feel like came out. Danger now includes adverse health effects. You'll notice that health effects and occupational health, there's a lot more consideration given to them within the amendment bill. And that's important. Occupational health was always there, but it was sort of skirted around, especially from a contractor's perspective. It wasn't given the time and energy that it should have. We saw the leading indicator in the construction regulations. We could see that there was a bit more focus coming through on occupational health. And now with the amendment bill, there's a lot more to do with occupational health, which is important. It's as important as mental health. It's as important as physically, not injuring people on the site. So that's really good to see. Hazardous substances, the Hazardous Chemical Agents Act, it was released now earlier this year. You'll notice the amendment bill is trying its best to talk to that new act. And that act talks to the globally homogenized system, which is a global system on the labeling and the manufacturing and transportation of hazardous chemical agents. So that's nice to see that that's coming through. Incident, I really like this. It's now referred to as an occurrence. I quite like that. We've gone from accident to incident, and now the word occurrence, which is a great word to use. Occupational health standards have been brought into the Act. The standards have been brought in with the concept of systems as well. So it's not just to say you need a policy and a plan, health and safety plan. You now may be instructed by an inspector to have an entire system, a health and safety, an occupational health and safety system in place. And that's great to see. We need a level playing field where the built environment is expected to deliver a certain baseline on occupational health and safety. And I don't believe that baseline will be achieved with just a policy and a plan. So you'll notice that standards are coming in, and you'll notice that the requirement for systems, health and safety systems, has come in, which is great as well. That will further align us with bodies like SANAS. There's quite a lot of chat in the amendment bill with regards to SANAS, with regards to AIAs, and that's purposeful. The department, in my opinion, is on a drive to align how we do our business with how the accredited authorities say we should do business, which is a very clever move. Permanent disablements and occupational diseases, there's a bit more focus on that. They now are better aligned with the COID Act. Risk, which is what I want to talk about today. I've only got a couple of minutes, but risk is really the main platform from us as contractors' perspective of where the amendment bill is going. Self-employed and users, we're not going to talk too much about that. I like the new definition of user that took out with relation to plants and equipment. I like that because that was a bit of a loophole initially. Listed work has been given a little bit more definition, a little bit more focus on that. There's a discussion about health and safety systems. Risk, which I'll get into in a further slide, but this is really where the focus is today. It's been purposefully made to shine very bright within the Act, which is good. It's got huge implications, especially on large-scale operations, on the adequacy of the existing control measures. So in a nutshell, risk is no longer just the employee-employer relationship and those perhaps impacted directly. They start using the word person now in the Act, which is important. A person that is directly impacted by your work. So if we take a mining operation, okay, fair enough, this Act is for the more of the built environment application. But if we emit a gas, for instance, and that gas travels 100 miles away and lands and infects someone, it's direct infectment. The risk all of a sudden is not just that small localized pocket where you're doing your building work. Your risk is becoming far more broad, which I believe is quite important. We need to be responsible. Communication has been updated. This is one of my more favorite things that they've done. The concept that if the person you're talking to does not understand what you've said, then you haven't communicated to them. And I like that. So a great example is we've got 11 official languages in the country. I stand in front of a crowd of individuals in Zululand. I speak English. That's not to say I've communicated. Yes, I've spoken to them, but whether I've communicated or not is quite important. And the use of the word conversant is used a bit more. That understanding, there's a fundamental that you need to understand what has been said in application, not just hear what has been said. I like that quite a lot. Contraventions as a deterrent have been made far stricter. We'll get onto that in the last slide. And then the delegation of duties is something small for most of us. I don't think it's going to be a huge impact, but it is something that we need to be clear about, that a 16.2 cannot further delegate their duties. I have worked with contractors and projects in the past where 16.2 has 3 or 4 16.2s therefore after below them. And that's been removed quite clearly now, which is important. Also, the reference to a CEO is quite clearly, as Mr. Sanzana said, it's the CEO of the company. So you go into like a CIPC Act, that CEO, not a CEO of health and safety, not a CEO of a region or whatever. It's the CEO of the company, which is quite nice. Health and safety representatives, the representatives are personally required to conduct their duties by law. That is given a little bit of responsibility. What we need to be cautious of here is a two-way street. So we can't just stand back as an employer and say, well, you know you're responsible, go sort it out. It doesn't work that way. We have to give them the resources, the time, the place, the training. We have to make sure that they know how to do what they're expected to do, which is actually a great thing. Health and safety reps, health and safety representative meetings, the committees is an area that we're particularly weak on in the industry, and it's something that we need to improve on. And I believe this focus in the amendment bill will help that. Occupational health and safety statistics on an annual basis, I quite like that. So we as a company will provide stats. I believe it's at the end of March every year. That's the current proposal. What those stats will say and what the format is, we don't know yet, but I like that idea. Let's report into the department. Here's our LTIFR, or here's our total manpower, whatever you might need to know. That's great because the inspector then has got raw data to start an investigation on or to close an investigation on. They can do a lot with that data, which is great. There's been some updates to improve the Department of Employment and Labour inspectors themselves, how they conduct themselves, the competency that's expected from them, and also the access that they have to information and to your site. Far clearer than it used to be, and that's also a very good thing. If the guy doesn't have a card or the lady doesn't have a card, person does not come onto site. Quite obviously, we are not in the business of turning away chief inspectors or junior inspectors, but it's nice to see that there's a nice clear line now of how it will work and what is expected from each party, which is great. And then a quick chat on AIA. That's not what I'm here for. Right, so focus on risk. This is really what we're talking about. The main bullet, if I can call it that, that's coming out of the amendment bill for us as contractors is an increased understanding of the word risk and an increased application of risk and an increased accountability that we as an employer have to ensure that risk is controlled or mitigated entirely. And that's fantastic. What I've done is I've pulled these little charts from the ISO 31001 standard, which if I were to look into my little glass ball, that's the standard most of us should be going for. That's going to be a very useful standard to get on board with. Once the bill comes out and once the general administrative regulations are amended and all the other regulations are amended in line, we're going to get closer and closer and closer to an ISO 31001 style management system. So that would be my little inside info. So try to get yourself aligned with that. I'm not going to go through this little slide. Once again, time's an issue, but this is the main focus. This is the process part of it. Most of us that are in this presentation should already understand this. But what is to say is we need to understand the scope, the context, and the criteria first of the risk. So it's any person that may be directly impacted or affected by our work. To scope that is going to be a massive task, which is quite exciting in the one light. We know already our risks to our employees. Those are quite straightforward. Most of our employees are caught struck by very basic, very obvious physical risks. But now we're talking about people that we might not even see on a daily basis. We may never see our neighbor visually. However, all of a sudden, the risk that we are imposing on that person needs to be managed. And it needs to be managed in a legal sense, not just sort of softly. It needs to be properly managed. So the 31001 standard says you scope, you context, and you find the criteria. From there, you move into a risk assessment. Most of us will use the HAZOP figure. HAZOP makes sense. It's one of the more simpler processes to use. And then we put that into a cycle of monitoring and review. We put that into a cycle of communication and consultation, and we work it. And it'll be an absolutely continuous process. It will not be a case of, let's use something basic, let's use something like a generator, something really small on a construction site. A generator is a generator is a generator. The changes in the risk are minimal. Generators we used 10 years ago are the same generators I'm using today on my site. However, all of a sudden, we're not just talking about the employee, we're talking about persons. That broadens it up. So we've got a new user, or does the generator perhaps have a new guard, or does the generator perhaps start in a slightly different way? All of a sudden, the Department of Employment and Labour has got the energy to ask you for those pieces of information and not just this broad, basic risk assessment, which I really like. I think it gives them a lot more oomph, and it's going to put the contractor in a position to assess their risks properly. My last little slide of info is the fines and penalties, which I mentioned on a webinar we did recently. You know, the fines and penalties are not there to put people in jail. It is not the intention, this is my opinion, of the Department of Employment and Labour to fine people. It is there as a deterrent. It is there to say, guys, ethically, you should be doing the right thing anyways. However, if you err and if you go off and you do not follow the law and you're non-compliant, then yes, we are at a maximum. There are different schedules, there are different categories. In your own time, have a look at those. But the real impact part of it is that if you're naughty enough, the department might put through a case to the MPA to put your CEO in jail for 5 years and fine that person 5 million rand. So that is one heck of a deterrent. And I think it's a long time coming. You know, your environmental management acts have had similar deterrents for a while already. And that's important. That is a really impactful deterrent. We're not talking about 10,000 rand and rubbish like that. If the CEO of a company is non-compliant enough, quite obviously this is a serious non-compliance in terms of the schedules, but there are around us, make no mistake, that individual could be facing 5 years and or both 5 million rand fine, which is great. At the bottom there, you'll see, watch the full size presentation with our Chief Inspector, the same gentleman that we just spoke with, Chief Inspector Thibo Sinzana. There is a link on the SARS YouTube page where Mr. Thibo goes through a very similar slide to what you've seen here, slightly more detail, because I believe he just had a bit more time. But go through that. There's a very useful presentation that SARS put together as well. And then from my side, just a big thank you for the BBCBE for hosting this webinar and for the effort that they put into the industry. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I apologize that it is so short and so violently presented, but time is what time is. I believe we'll move on to questions and answers, and then we'll work it from there. Thank you very much for your time.